Here's what Joe Rogan had to say about whether Christianity and the Ten Commandments should be included in schools.
The Ten Commandments in the schools. What do you think about that?
I don't like it.
Why?
Well, I think the Ten Commandments are very interesting. I think mandating it in classrooms in public schools, the problem with that is like, what about the Muslims? What about the Buddhists? What about the Hindus? What about all the other religions that exist? You're going to be religiously bigoted if you teach only one. If you're only like, you think people would be cool if they had entire public school systems where everybody just taught Islam? Could you imagine if a full city, like every public school, just people would be up in arms?
I like Joe, but here's why what he's saying not only is wrong, but it doesn't make any sense logically at all. The reason he's saying that Christianity shouldn't be taught in schools is because it would be unfair to Islamic families and to Hindu families. Basically, we need to keep things as even as possible. And the logic he also uses is, what if it was Islam? What if Islam was taught to all the children? We wouldn't be very happy with that, would we? Well, firstly, that's a false equivalence, because Islam and Christianity are completely different. But how are they similar? They're similar because they're both moral belief systems. Well, Islam is much more than that, but it encompasses a moral belief system. To be fair, he's saying that we shouldn't teach that in schools. But what is a school for? What is the purpose of a school? Why send children to school at all? It's so that they can learn. And of course, someone could say, oh yeah, but it's because we want them to learn English and maths and science, but not any kind of moral belief system. But that's not true. Obviously, anyone who's been to school knows that it's a formative part of your moral growth. And not only that, but you can't even have a school if you don't have a moral belief system, because you need to be able to even first believe that learning about English and history and science is something that's worth doing. That's a moral decision. You're saying this is a valuable thing to be doing. And more broadly than that, I mean, when I think of my time at school, some of the key moments that stand out were when I did something wrong. And when a teacher came up to me and said, you know, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, this is how you need to behave. That's a huge part of schooling. And where do those ideas come from? Because Christianity has different ideas about that than does Islam, than does Hinduism, than does atheism for that point. Well, atheism doesn't really have anything to say about that. But the point is that schools fundamentally involve teaching children about morality, about how they should behave. And not only that, but when Joe Rogan says that we need to be fair and not enforce a certain moral belief system upon children at schools, he himself is making a moral claim when he's saying that. So to say that it would be unfair to teach Christianity instead of teaching Islam, or to teach Christianity when there are children of Islamic families at a school, he's saying that the top virtue, the top value that he's prioritizing in his moral view of the world is fairness, is equality, is a kind of equality, that is the highest good. So by saying that we can't force people into a certain moral framework, he's saying that his moral framework is what we need to all abide by. And not only that, that moral framework that we shouldn't force people to do things, that actually comes from a Christian worldview. It's not part of an Islamic worldview. In the Quran, there are incentives that are laid out to try and get people to convert to Islam. There's a tax in the Quran that Christians and non-Muslims had to pay when they were living in Muslim societies in order to incentivize them to convert to Islam. And it worked. Look at Turkey now. It used to be the cultural home of Christianity, and now it's, 99% Muslim. I don't know the figures, but it's a Muslim country. And on the other hand, in the Bible, in the New Testament, following Jesus is a completely voluntary decision. That's what he taught, that joining a moral, order and adopting a moral framework is a voluntary choice. So the fact that Joe Rogan even thinks this is because he was raised in a Western country, the mindset of the inhabitants of which has been shaped by the moral tradition, Christianity, for hundreds, for thousands of years, actually. So to say that we shouldn't teach a moral belief system at schools to children not only doesn't make sense, because we are going to do that. That's what we're going to do. And if we don't actually do it by a coherent system, then we're just going to default to not having no moral belief system, but by having the one that Joe Rogan is proposing, which has been proposed by people for decades now, which is basically really loose diversity and equality between all people. And not to say that that's not important, but he's putting that as the top virtue, and then the rest of the virtues are all really loosely defined. So the end result of that is that children just don't get a moral education. They get a really shaky moral education at best. And that's exactly what Matthew McConaughey was pointing to in this discussion. He was saying that it's a real shame that children are not taught any moral belief systems in school now. And that's why we have sort of the breakdown of unity in Western societies. And we don't have any shared expectations, is exactly the words that Matthew McConaughey used. We don't have any shared expectations about how we should behave around each other. So there is a problem with education now. The problem is that we're not teaching any moral belief system. We don't have a moral belief system that's better than Christianity. In fact, it's actually a good moral belief system. Joe Rogan's right that it would be bad to teach everyone Islam, but that's not because it would be bad to teach anyone a moral belief system. It's because Islam is not the best moral belief system to teach people. Christianity is the best one that we have. We're already teaching it to people indirectly, because it's so embedded in the way in Western countries that we view the world. In fact, as I mentioned before, the sort of libertarian idea that Joe Rogan proposes is born out of Christianity. So it's an outgrowth of Christian thinking, but it's definitely, like the results, the fruit, we will know something by its fruits, Jesus says. And the fruits of this belief system that Joe Rogan is proposing, we're seeing them now, as Matthew McConaughey was pointing out.
Right now, there's not an agreed upon expectation of how to treat each other.
Right. And there's reward in treating each other like shit if you're successful.
You are rewarded for it.
Yeah.
And maybe much more than almost, if you do follow the rules,
kind of a
fucking
sucker.
rube.
Yeah, you're kind of a sucker.
That's not going to have a long. That can't have a long play for us.
No.
That is not a selfish move.